Hey guys, tonight we are traveling back, way back, through the sands of time, past the pyramids shimmering under the relentless sun, past the bustling markets filled with the scent of spices and the sound of 1,000 voices, all the way to ancient Egypt, a land of gods and mortals, of monumental structures and whispered secrets. You can almost feel the dry air on your skin, the grit between your toes, the weight of history pressing down. It's a place where life was cheap and power was absolute. A place where, let's be honest, you probably wouldn't survive 5 minutes without a guide and a serious allergy to dysentery. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Our journey begins in the New Kingdom, a time when Egypt stood as a superpower, stretching its influence far and wide. Think of it as the Roman Empire of its day, but with more cat gods and less central heating. It's the 18th dynasty, roughly the mid-15th century BC, a period often remembered for its warrior pharaohs who expanded Egypt's borders with bronze and chariots. You might picture guys like Thutmose III or Ramesses the Great, chiseled figures smiting enemies on temple walls, radiating pure, unadulterated masculine power. That was the standard playbook. The pharaoh was the strongman, the divine protector, the one who kept the chaos of the outside world from spilling into the ordered cosmos of Egypt. But tonight we're meeting someone who rewrote the playbook entirely, not with military might, but with surprising grace and unwavering determination. We're going to talk about Hatshepsut. Now, just saying her name feels a bit exotic, doesn't it? Hatshepsut. Try saying it a few times, slowly. Hatshepsut. It rolls off the tongue like ancient papyrus unrolling. And she was, to put it mildly, an anomaly. In a world dominated by men, where the pharaoh was almost exclusively male, she rose to claim the throne herself. Not as a queen consort, not as a regent ruling for someone else indefinitely, but as the pharaoh, the king, with all the titles, regalia, and divine authority that came with the job. Imagine the scene. You're living in Thebes, the capital city, buzzing with activity. Priests are tending to the gods in the massive temple complexes, scribes are recording everything from grain harvests to legal disputes, and the Nile is your highway, teeming with boats carrying goods up and down the river. Life is structured, predictable, bound by tradition and the cycles of the seasons and the Nile's flood. And then your ruler, the one who stands between you and cosmic disaster, is a woman. Not just any woman, but the daughter of a mighty pharaoh, Thutmose I, and the principal wife of another, Thutmose II. She had the royal blood, no doubt about it. But the throne? That was supposed to pass to a son. A male heir. Hatshepsut's rise wasn't a sudden coup, though. It was a slow, deliberate process, a masterclass in political maneuvering and self-promotion that would make any modern PR firm green with envy. Initially, she stepped in as regent for her young stepson, Thutmose III, who was just a boy when his father, Thutmose II, died. Being regent was a recognized role for royal women, a temporary position of power until the true king came of age. But Hatshepsut wasn't interested in temporary. She had inherited not just royal lineage, but also, it seems, her father's ambition and knack for governance. While the typical pharaoh of this era was expected to lead armies into battle, expanding the empire and bringing back tribute, Hatshepsut took a different path. Her reign, once she declared herself pharaoh, became notable not for conquest, but for construction and commerce. She focused inward, on building and restoring temples across Egypt, on organizing grand expeditions not for plunder, but for peaceful trade. This was revolutionary. It was like a modern leader deciding to invest heavily in infrastructure and international relations instead of military spending, a concept we still grapple with today. This focus on peace and internal prosperity wasn't just a personal preference. It was a deliberate policy choice that defined her rule. While Thutmose III, her stepson and co-regent, at least officially for a while, would later become known as a great warrior pharaoh, Hatshepsut carved out her own legacy by prioritizing different kinds of achievements. She understood that Egypt's strength didn't solely rely on how much territory it controlled or how many enemies it defeated. It also depended on its economic vitality, its connection to the divine through magnificent temples, and the well-being of its people. One mainstream historical fact about her reign is that she initiated some of the most ambitious building projects of the New Kingdom, rivaling those of later, more famous pharaohs. Her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari, which we'll explore in detail, is a prime example, a stunning, multi-terrace structure built into the cliffs, unlike anything seen before. It wasn't just a tomb, it was a statement, a monument to her reign's unique character and achievements. A quirky tidbit? Well, to fully assume the role of pharaoh, she often depicted herself with traditional kingly attributes, including the false beard worn by male rulers. Imagine that. This wasn't about gender identity in a modern sense, but about projecting the necessary image of divine kingship. She was the living Horus, and Horus was male. So, if the job required a beard, she'd wear the beard, even if the accompanying text referred to His Majesty she. It's a fascinating blend of pragmatism and performance art. Historians still argue whether this focus on peace was a calculated strategy to consolidate power while Thutmose III was young, or if it genuinely reflected her preferred style of governance. Was she avoiding military campaigns because a female pharaoh leading an army would be too controversial, or did she simply believe that trade and building were better for Egypt? It's one of those delicious historical mysteries we can chew on. What is clear is that her reign stands out as a period of relative stability and prosperity, marked by monumental achievements in architecture and trade, rather than the usual drumbeat of war. She was a pharaoh who chose the chisel and the trade ship over the sword and the chariot, and that made her reign truly unique. So, you're standing there in ancient Thebes, trying to wrap your head around the idea of a female pharaoh focusing on trade instead of conquest. But how did she even get into a position to make such radical choices? It wasn't just random chance. Hatshepsut was born into the purple, as they say, though in Egypt it was more like born into the gold and lapis lazuli. Her father was Thutmose I, a genuinely impressive pharaoh who had expanded Egypt's empire south into Nubia and east into Syria. He was a conqueror, a builder, a guy who knew how to project power. Her mother was Queen Ahmose, the great royal wife, meaning she was the principal queen and likely of pure royal blood herself. This gave Hatshepsut impeccable lineage, the kind of family tree you'd frame and hang in the most prominent spot in your palace. Being born the daughter of the pharaoh and the great royal wife meant you had status, privilege, and a pretty comfortable life compared to, say, the guy hauling stones for a pyramid or the lady trying to sell questionable fish down by the docks. You'd be educated, surrounded by servants, and involved in courtly life. But the throne? That usually went to the eldest son of the great royal wife. If there wasn't one, it might go to a son by a lesser wife, who would then often marry a royal daughter to shore up his legitimacy. Thutmose I did have a son, Thutmose II, but his mother was a secondary wife, Mutnofret. So, even though he was male, his claim wasn't quite as strong as it could have been. This set the stage for potential complications down the line. Now, to truly cement a pharaoh's right to rule, especially when the succession wasn't perfectly straightforward or when they were doing something unprecedented like being a female king, the Egyptians had a powerful tool, the divine birth narrative. This wasn't unique to Hatshepsut. Many pharaohs commissioned elaborate stories and temple reliefs showing the god Ammonius himself visiting the pharaoh's mother, impregnating her, and declaring that the child would be the next ruler. It was essentially state-sponsored propaganda, saying, "Hey, don't question my right to be here, the chief god himself planned it." Hatshepsut took this concept and ran with it. She had a stunning series of reliefs carved on the walls of her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari, the one we'll get to later, trust me, it's worth the wait, detailing her own divine birth. The story goes that the god Ammonius, advised by the other gods, decided that Thutmose I's successor should be his pure-blooded daughter, Hatshepsut. Ammonius then journeyed to Earth, disguised as Thutmose I, and visited Queen Ahmose. The reliefs show the divine union, the gods creating Hatshepsut's Ka, life force, and body, and Ammonius declaring to the creator god Khnum that he had made a daughter who would rule Egypt and bring peace. It's quite a production. Imagine seeing these vibrant, painted scenes thousands of years ago. It's not just a birth announcement, it's a cosmic decree. It's a way of saying, my right to rule isn't just because my dad was king, it's because the gods wanted me here. They ordained it from the moment of conception. This was a crucial part of her strategy to legitimize her rule, especially given the traditional male role of pharaoh. A mainstream historical fact here is that Hatshepsut's divine birth narrative, depicted in detail at Deir el-Bahari, is one of the most complete and well-preserved examples of this type of royal legitimation propaganda from ancient Egypt. It's not just a myth, it's a physical historical record of how she presented her claim to power to her people. Now, for a quirky tidbit about this divine birth story, the reliefs show Ammonius disguised as Thutmose I, but they also show Queen Ahmose being fanned by attendants and sniffing a lotus flower, which was a symbol associated with rebirth and divinity. The scene is incredibly detailed, even showing the gods involved in forming the baby in the womb. It's like the ancient Egyptian equivalent of a highly stylized, divinely approved maternity photo shoot. It's over the top, sure, but it gets the point across. This wasn't just a human birth. This was a divine intervention. So, Hatshepsut grew up as a royal princess, clearly marked by destiny according to her later accounts. She would have been educated in the ways of the court, religion, and perhaps even administration. She also held an important religious title, God's wife of Ammonius. This was a powerful position, especially in Thebes, the center of Ammonius' cult. It gave her significant religious and economic influence even before she became regent or pharaoh. Following tradition, she married her half-brother, Thutmose II. This was a common practice in the royal family, intended to keep the royal bloodline pure, a concept that sounds pretty strange to us today, but was standard procedure for Egyptian royalty. Thutmose II became pharaoh, and Hatshepsut was his great royal wife. Their union produced a daughter, Neferu, but no son. Thutmose II's reign wasn't particularly long or notable compared to his father or the pharaohs who would follow. He faced some minor rebellions but didn't embark on the large-scale campaigns of his predecessor. His health may have been poor. Some mummified remains tentatively identified as his show signs of disease. His relatively short reign created the succession crisis that Hatshepsut would navigate. When Thutmose II died, the only male heir was a young boy, Thutmose III, born to a secondary wife named Iset. He was too young to rule alone, and the established system called for a regent to govern on his behalf until he came of age. And who better to step into that role than the great royal wife, the daughter of the mighty Thutmose I, the one with the impeccable bloodline and, according to later claims, divine destiny? Historians still argue whether the divine birth narrative was primarily conceived and propagated after Hatshepsut declared herself pharaoh as a justification for her unprecedented move, or if elements of this divine sanction were already part of her identity and aspirations before she took the throne. Was it a calculated move to legitimize an existing power grab, or did she genuinely believe in her divine right, building upon earlier religious roles? It's a fascinating puzzle, trying to separate genuine belief from political strategy in the ancient world. Regardless of the exact timeline of the propaganda, her royal birth, her marriage into the ruling generation, and her significant religious role as God's wife of Ammonius positioned her perfectly to step into the vacuum left by Thutmose II's death. The stage was set for her to move from the traditional, powerful role of great royal wife to the unprecedented role of regent, and then, eventually, to claim the very title of pharaoh herself. But that transition, from regent to king, was a delicate dance of power, tradition, and sheer audacity. So, there you are, watching the court in Thebes. Thutmose II, the pharaoh who married Hatshepsut, has passed on. The designated heir is Thutmose III, his son by a secondary wife, too young to rule. The stage is set for a familiar role, the great royal wife stepping in as regent. This was a recognized, if temporary, position. Think of it like being the CEO of a company while the actual owner's kid is in kindergarten, waiting to take over. You're running things, making decisions, but everyone knows it's not your company in the long run. Or is it? Hatshepsut stepped into this role as regent, Hetephat Ses. She who is joined with the king. Initially, everything probably looked standard. She would have managed the royal household, overseen state affairs, and guided the young Thutmose III in his kingly duties. The expectation, based on tradition, was that she would hold the reins until he reached maturity, maybe around his late teens, and then gracefully step back, perhaps retaining influence as the queen mother. But Hatshepsut, as we're learning, wasn't one for sticking strictly to the script. The transition from regent for the king to queen as the king wasn't a sudden lightning strike. It was more like the slow, steady rise of the Nile flood, gradual, inevitable, and ultimately transformative. She didn't just manage the palace, she began to assert her authority in ways that blurred the lines between regent and ruler. You start seeing subtle shifts. Her name, which would normally appear after the king's, starts appearing alongside Thutmose III's unofficial documents, and even smaller monuments. Then, perhaps, her name starts appearing before his. The visual representations begin to change too. Initially, she might be shown in the traditional dress of a queen, kneeling or standing respectfully behind the young king. But over time, her depictions start incorporating elements previously reserved for the male pharaoh: the Nemes headcloth, the uraeus cobra on her forehead, the false beard. This wasn't just about vanity. It was a carefully calculated political strategy. By adopting the symbols of kingship, she was signaling her intent to claim the full authority of the office. She wasn't just the power behind the throne, she was positioning herself on the throne. This gradual assertion of power likely happened over a few years. The exact timeline is a bit murky, but it seems she moved from regent to a kind of co-regent, ruling explicitly alongside Thutmose III, before eventually dropping the pretense and declaring herself the sole pharaoh. Imagine the court during this time. There would have been factions. Supporters of the young Thutmose III, perhaps his mother Iset, or powerful figures who saw their influence tied to the boy king. And then there were those who saw Hatshepsut's strength, her lineage, and perhaps benefited from her administration. It would have been a delicate balancing act, a constant negotiation of power and loyalty. She couldn't just push Thutmose III aside immediately. He was the legitimate male heir in the traditional sense. So, she created a new reality, one where she ruled as pharaoh, while acknowledging, at least for a time, his existence as the titular co-ruler. A mainstream historical fact is that Hatshepsut officially ruled as regent for approximately 7 years before taking the unprecedented step of crowning herself pharaoh. This period of regency allowed her to consolidate power, build a support base, and lay the groundwork for her later claim to the throne. It wasn't a snap decision made overnight. Now, for a quirky tidbit about this period, some early depictions from her regency show Hatshepsut and Thutmose III together, with Thutmose III depicted in the traditional size and position of the ruling king, and Hatshepsut in a secondary role. But as her power grew, later depictions from the co-regency period often show them as equals in size and status, standing side by side, both wearing kingly regalia. It's like watching her literally grow into the crown on the temple walls. Historians still argue whether Hatshepsut's declaration of herself as pharaoh was a calculated usurpation of power from her stepson, or if it was a necessary step to ensure stability and effective governance in Egypt, given the young age of Thutmose III and potentially other political factors. Was she always aiming for the top job, or did the circumstances of the regency push her towards this unprecedented move? We don't have her diary, if only, so we're left interpreting the monuments, inscriptions, and later historical accounts, which are often biased. The transition wasn't just about titles and depictions. It was about taking on the full responsibilities and rituals of kingship. The pharaoh was not just a political leader. They were the intermediary between Egypt and the gods, responsible for maintaining Ma'at, cosmic order and justice. This involved performing complex religious ceremonies, overseeing major building projects, which we'll definitely get to, and ensuring the prosperity of the land. By declaring herself pharaoh, Hatshepsut was taking on this entire divine and earthly burden. She didn't just wake up one morning and decide to wear a beard. This was a process, a careful negotiation of tradition and ambition. She had to convince the powerful priesthood of Ammonius, the administrators, the military leaders, and ideally, the general populace, that she was the legitimate ruler, chosen by the gods. Her impeccable lineage, her role as God's wife of Ammonius, and her effective management during the regency all played a part. But the ultimate step, claiming the pharaoh's throne for herself, required audacity and a profound understanding of Egyptian belief and politics. It set the stage for a reign that would be unlike any other in the new kingdom, a reign defined not by conquest, but by creation and connection. So, you've seen Hatshepsut navigate the tricky waters of being regent for the young Thutmose III. You've seen her start to subtly shift the narrative, her name appearing more prominently, her image beginning to adopt kingly symbols. But the real mic drop moment, the move that truly set her apart and probably sent shockwaves through the ancient Egyptian establishment, was her decision to stop being the power behind the throne and become the pharaoh on the throne. She didn't just continue acting as regent, she declared herself king, taking on the full titles, regalia, and responsibilities of the male office. This wasn't just changing her job title on her LinkedIn profile. This was unprecedented. In the thousands of years of Egyptian history up to that point, while women held immense power as queens and queen mothers, and even occasionally stepped into temporary ruling roles during crises, none had ever successfully and enduringly claimed the full kingship, the divine role of pharaoh, for herself. There was one brief, obscure female ruler much earlier, Sobenferu, but Hatshepsut's reign was far longer, more prominent, and better documented. Her move was a seismic shift in how power was wielded and perceived. Imagine the buzz in Thebes. The scribes scratching their heads, trying to figure out how to write official decrees referring to His Majesty she. The priests grappling with the religious implications of a female embodiment of the living Horus, traditionally a male deity. The average person just trying to understand who was in charge now, the boy king, or his stepmother who suddenly looked a lot like a king. It would be like the Queen of England suddenly deciding to identify as king and start wearing a full ceremonial beard to state functions. It just wasn't in the playbook. To make this claim stick, Hatshepsut fully embraced the iconography of kingship. She didn't just wear a crown, she wore the crowns, the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, the blue crown for military campaigns, even though she wasn't waging many, the Nemes headcloth with the uraeus cobra at the brow. These weren't just fashionable accessories, they were potent symbols of divine authority and dominion over the two lands. But the most striking, and perhaps most discussed, piece of her adopted regalia was the false beard. This wasn't a natural beard, of course. Egyptian pharaohs, male or female, often wore ceremonial beards, usually braided or straight, sometimes made of gold or other precious materials, affixed to the chin. It was a symbol of divinity and kingship, linking the earthly ruler to the timeless, unchanging nature of the gods. By wearing this false beard, Hatshepsut was visually asserting her claim to the divine, male office of pharaoh. Think about it from their perspective. The pharaoh was the living embodiment of Horus, the falcon god, son of Osiris. Horus was male. The pharaoh performed rituals that required a male presence, standing in for the divine father. If you were going to be the pharaoh, you had to perform the role of the pharaoh, and that role was defined by male attributes and male symbolism. This wasn't about Hatshepsut saying, "I identify as a man." It was about her saying, "I am performing the function of king," which requires adopting the established symbols of kingship, even the beard, because the office itself is symbolically male. It's like an actress taking on a male role in a play. She's still herself, but she's embodying the character, costume and all. Except in this case, the play was reality, and the stakes were the stability of Egypt. Her statues and temple reliefs from this period are fascinating. You see her depicted with a muscular, male-like body, wearing the shendit kilt, the royal apron, and yes, the false beard. Yet, the accompanying inscriptions and texts often use female grammatical forms when referring to her, calling her, Her Majesty, or she. This linguistic dissonance, this blend of male visual representation and female grammatical reference, is unique to her reign and highlights the complex tightrope she walked. She was a woman being the king. It's the ancient Egyptian equivalent of a power suit, but cranked up to 11 with divine implications. A mainstream historical fact about Hatshepsut's reign is that she was consistently depicted in official art and inscriptions with the full regalia of a male pharaoh, including the false beard, alongside traditional female titles and grammar and texts. This deliberate choice was a crucial part of her strategy to legitimize her unprecedented claim to the throne. Now, for a quirky tidbit about this false beard. While many pharaohs wore ceremonial beards, Hatshepsut's depictions sometimes show her wearing different styles. A short, straight beard typically worn by living pharaohs, and sometimes a longer, braided beard associated with gods and deceased pharaohs. This might suggest she was emphasizing different aspects of her divine and royal authority at different times, or simply reflecting artistic conventions. Imagine having multiple styles of official beard for different occasions. Oh, today I'm feeling more divine ancestor, let's go with the braided gold. Historians still argue whether Hatshepsut's adoption of male iconography was primarily a pragmatic necessity to fit the established mold of kingship and gain acceptance from a conservative society, or if it represented a deeper religious or political statement about the nature of pharaonic rule itself. Was she simply playing the part required to rule effectively, or was she subtly redefining what it meant to be pharaoh? It's another layer of complexity in understanding her motivations and the challenges she faced. This adoption of the kingly persona wasn't just for show, it was essential for her to perform the duties of pharaoh. She had to participate in religious festivals, lead processions, oversee monumental construction projects, and receive foreign dignitaries, all activities traditionally associated with the male ruler. By presenting herself as pharaoh, she was able to step fully into these roles, asserting her authority not just through decrees, but through her physical presence and participation in the rituals that bound Egypt together. Her transformation from regent to pharaoh in a false beard was a carefully orchestrated performance, a masterclass in political theater and propaganda. It required immense courage and strategic thinking. She wasn't just breaking the glass ceiling, she was shattering the granite ceiling of ancient Egyptian tradition. And this bold step laid the foundation for her unique reign, a reign where the focus would shift dramatically from military expansion to the peaceful pursuits of building and trade. She had claimed the throne, now she had to prove she was worthy of it, not by conquering new lands, but by enriching the land she already ruled. So, you've just witnessed Hatshepsut's bold move, stepping out from behind the scenes, putting on the kingly costume, beard and all, and declaring herself pharaoh. But simply saying you're the king, especially when you're breaking millennia of tradition, isn't enough. You need buy-in. You need legitimacy. You need the gods on your side, the powerful priests nodding along, and ideally, the people believing that cosmic order hasn't completely collapsed just because the ruler wears eyeliner and occasionally refers to herself in the feminine. This wasn't just a change in title. It was a massive undertaking in public relations and divine validation. Hatshepsut understood this implicitly. She knew that to make her unprecedented claim stick, she had to weave a narrative so compelling, so deeply rooted in Egyptian belief and tradition, that it would override the visual disconnect of a female pharaoh. Her strategy was multifaceted, combining religious propaganda, strategic alliances, and tangible achievements that demonstrated her fitness to rule. First and foremost was securing the backing of the priesthood, particularly the powerful priests of Ammonius at Thebes. Thebes was the religious and political heart of Egypt during the New Kingdom, and the cult of Ammonius was incredibly wealthy and influential. The pharaoh was the chief intermediary between the people and Ammonius, performing crucial rituals to ensure the gods' favor and the prosperity of Egypt. If the priests weren't on board, her claim would be dead in the water, or perhaps more accurately, stuck in the mud on the banks of the Nile. Hatshepsut had a significant advantage here, her previous role as God's wife of Ammonius. Remember that? It was a powerful religious position that gave her considerable influence and connections within the temple hierarchy even before she became regent. She leveraged this existing relationship, likely showering the temple with gifts, land, and resources. She also promoted loyal officials within the priesthood and administration, building a network of support that was crucial for her survival and legitimacy. It was like getting the ultimate endorsement from the biggest religious authority in the land, the ancient equivalent of a celestial Twitter verification tick. Beyond cultivating priestly support, she doubled down on the divine birth narrative we touched on earlier. She didn't just mention it, she commissioned those extensive reliefs at Deir el-Bahari, depicting Ammonius' visit to her mother and the divine planning of her rule. This wasn't subtle. This was literally carving her divine right into stone for everyone to see, a permanent, public declaration that her kingship wasn't a political accident, but a cosmic decree. Imagine walking through that temple courtyard and seeing these scenes. It would be incredibly powerful, reinforcing the idea that she was Ammonius' chosen one. Her propaganda extended beyond the divine birth. In inscriptions and on statues, she emphasized her connection to her father, Thutmose, portraying herself as his true heir, fulfilling his legacy. This was smart politics. Thutmose was a respected, successful pharaoh, and linking herself directly to his undisputed legitimacy provided another layer of justification for her rule. She also commissioned numerous statues of herself, often depicted in the full male regalia as we discussed, but sometimes also in a more ambiguous form, or even subtly retaining some female softness in the face while wearing the beard and kilt. These statues were placed in temples and public spaces across Egypt, making her visible as the ruling pharaoh and normalizing her image in the minds of the people. It was like flooding ancient Egypt with billboards featuring her face, saying, "Yep, this is the boss now." Crucially, Hatshepsut quickly embarked on building projects. The pharaoh was expected to build for the gods and for Egypt. It was a fundamental duty, a way of maintaining Maat and demonstrating the ruler's capability and piety. Her early building programs weren't just about construction, they were statements of intent and legitimacy. By initiating significant projects, she was proving that she could perform the core functions of kingship just as effectively as any male predecessor. One of her most significant early building initiatives was the restoration and expansion of temples that had fallen into disrepair, particularly after the period of Hisco's rule centuries earlier. She positioned herself as a restorer of order, a champion of the gods, bringing back the glory of Egypt. This resonated deeply with Egyptian sensibilities. It wasn't flashy conquest, but quiet, diligent work that benefited the gods and the country. A mainstream historical fact is that Hatshepsut undertook extensive building and restoration work throughout Egypt early in her reign, including significant additions to the temple complex at Karnak, the primary cult center of Ammonius. These projects served not only religious and practical purposes but also functioned as powerful tools of political legitimacy, showcasing her piety, wealth, and capability as pharaoh. Now, for a quirky tidbit, among her early projects at Karnak, Hatshepsut erected a pair of towering obelisks. These monolithic stone needles, tipped with electrum, an alloy of gold and silver, that would catch the sun's rays, were potent symbols of the pharaoh's connection to the sun god Ra and their role in maintaining cosmic order. One inscription on her obelisk at Karnak famously states that she erected them in 7 months, a remarkably short time, likely intended to highlight her efficiency and divine favor. It's like bragging about finishing a massive public works project ahead of schedule on a giant stone tweet. Historians still argue whether Hatshepsut's initial focus on religious patronage and building projects was primarily a strategy to consolidate her power base among the priesthood and demonstrate legitimacy before attempting more ambitious undertakings, or if it genuinely reflected her preferred style of governance from the outset. Was she playing it safe while securing her position, or was this the kind of pharaoh she always intended to be? It's difficult to definitively separate calculated political maneuvering from genuine belief and administrative preference in the ancient context. Through this combination of divine narratives, strategic alliances with the priesthood, visible propaganda in statues and inscriptions, and tangible achievements in building and restoration, Hatshepsut systematically built her divine and political legitimacy. She wasn't just relying on her royal blood or her temporary role as regent. She was actively constructing her image as the rightful, divinely chosen pharaoh, capable of maintaining Maat and bringing prosperity to Egypt. This careful groundwork was essential for her to then pursue the distinctive policies that would define her reign, a focus not on the expansion of empire through warfare, but on internal development, grand building projects, and ambitious trade expeditions. She had proven she could wear the crown. Now she would show Egypt what kind of ruler she chose to be. So, Hatshepsut has done it. She's navigated the regency, asserted her claim, donned the symbolic beard, and used every tool in the ancient Egyptian propaganda box to legitimize her unprecedented rule. She's the pharaoh. But now what? The standard expectation for a new kingdom ruler was clear. Strap on your sandals, gather your chariots, and go conquer something. Expand the empire, bring back tribute, smite your enemies on temple walls for posterity. That was the job description, etched in stone across the land. Pharaohs like her father, Thutmose I, or the pharaoh who would follow her, Thutmose III, built their reputations, and Egypt's wealth, on military might and territorial expansion. But Hatshepsut didn't do that. Or at least, she didn't make it the defining characteristic of her reign. Instead of focusing outward on conquest, she focused inward on development, and outward on connection through trade. This was a conscious, deliberate choice, and it's what makes her reign so fascinatingly different from the warrior pharaohs who surround her in the history books. Imagine the pressure. You're the first woman to hold this office in any significant way, and you're already challenging tradition by simply being there. The easiest way to silence potential critics, to prove you're a strong and capable ruler in the eyes of the military, the court, and maybe even the gods, would be to lead a successful military campaign. Bring back prisoners, gold, cattle. Show everyone you've got the divine favor and the strategic chops to protect and expand Egypt. It would be the ultimate validation. But Hatshepsut chose a different path. While there were minor military actions during her reign, border skirmishes in Nubia and the Levant were pretty much a constant reality for Egypt, like annoying spam emails you just have to deal with. She didn't embark on the large-scale, aggressive campaigns typical of the era. Her monuments, unlike those of many other pharaohs, don't prominently feature scenes of her smiting enemies or leading victorious armies. Instead, they showcase building projects, religious ceremonies, and most famously, a grand trade expedition. This focus on peace wasn't passive, it was an active policy. It meant prioritizing diplomacy and trade relations with neighboring regions. It meant investing Egypt's resources not in bronze weapons and chariots, but in quarrying expeditions to bring back stone for temples, in shipbuilding for trade voyages, and in the internal infrastructure of the country. It was a strategy aimed at increasing Egypt's wealth and influence through economic means rather than military force. Think about the practical benefits of this approach. Constant warfare is expensive. It drains resources, requires a large standing army, and can destabilize border regions. Focusing on internal development, on the other hand, can lead to increased agricultural output, more efficient administration, and a wealthier, more stable population. Trade brings in exotic goods and resources that might be difficult or costly to acquire through conquest, like specialized timbers, resins, and luxury items. This isn't to say Hatshepsut was a pacifist in a modern sense. Ancient Egypt was not a gentle place, and the pharaoh was expected to maintain order both within Egypt and against external threats. She certainly had the capacity for military action if needed, and her officials and generals would have handled necessary border defenses. But her personal focus, the image she projected as pharaoh, and the major initiatives of her reign were overwhelmingly centered on building, restoring, and trading. It was a radical departure from the norm. While other pharaohs were boasting about how many enemies they killed, Hatshepsut was boasting about how many trees she planted, specifically, frankincense and myrrh trees brought back from Punt, which we'll definitely talk about. While others were funding campaigns, she was funding quarries and workshops. It was a different kind of power projection, one based on prosperity and piety rather than brute force. A mainstream historical fact about Hatshepsut's reign is that it is characterized by a notable absence of major military campaigns compared to the reigns of her immediate predecessors and successors in the 18th dynasty. Her focus was clearly directed towards internal projects and trade. Now, for a quirky tidbit, despite her general focus on peace, Hatshepsut did commission reliefs and statues that sometimes depicted her in traditional kingly poses, including smiting an enemy or leading a bull in a ceremonial hunt, activities associated with the pharaoh's role in overcoming chaos. These might have been symbolic representations necessary to fulfill the expectations of kingship, even if the actual focus of her reign was different. It's like putting on the costume for the photo op, even if your real work is behind a desk. Historians still argue whether Hatshepsut's decision to prioritize peace and trade was a strategic necessity due to her position as a female pharaoh, perhaps believing the military wouldn't fully accept a woman leading them into battle, or if it genuinely reflected her personal vision for Egypt and her understanding of how best to achieve prosperity and stability. Was she making a virtue of necessity, or was she a visionary leader who saw a better way forward than endless warfare? We don't have definitive answers, but her choices certainly led to a unique period in Egyptian history. Her reign became a golden age of building and exploration. The resources saved by not constantly funding large armies were poured into magnificent temples, towering obelisks, and ambitious expeditions. This focus on internal strength and economic prosperity through trade laid a different kind of foundation for Egypt's power, one that complemented the military might of pharaohs like Thutmose III, who would later build upon the stable and wealthy Egypt Hatshepsut cultivated. By choosing the chisel and the trade ship over the sword and the chariot, Hatshepsut redefined what it meant to be a successful pharaoh in her time. She showed that strength could be measured not just in conquered territory, but in thriving cities, magnificent monuments, and bustling trade routes. This conscious decision to prioritize peace, building, and trade was the bedrock of her unique legacy, setting the stage for the grand projects and expeditions that would immortalize her name, even when others tried to erase it. So, you've got Hatshepsut on the throne, not through conquest, but through a blend of lineage, political savvy, divine PR, and sheer willpower. She's chosen a different path, focusing on building and trade rather than endless war. And nowhere is this philosophy, this unique vision for her reign, more powerfully expressed than in her most magnificent creation, her mortuary temple complex at Deir el-Bahari. Imagine leaving the bustling city of Thebes, crossing the Nile to the West Bank, the realm of the setting sun, the place associated with burials and mortuary cults. Instead of just seeing pyramids or simple tombs carved into the rock, you arrive at the foot of towering limestone cliffs, the kind that look like they were carved by giants. And there, nestled against the sheer face of the cliff, rising in magnificent terraces, is a structure unlike anything else in Egypt. This is Djeser-Djeseru, Holy of Holies, Hatshepsut's mortuary temple. Most pharaohs built their mortuary temples adjacent to or near their tombs, often in the flatter desert plains. Hatshepsut chose this dramatic, almost theatrical location, integrating her temple directly into the natural landscape. It's a masterpiece of ancient architecture and engineering, designed by her chief architect and confidant, Senenmut, a man whose own rise to prominence under Hatshepsut is a fascinating story in itself. Walking towards it, you'd be struck by its scale and elegance. It doesn't have the massive, enclosed pylons and courtyards of temples dedicated to the living gods, like Karnak. Instead, it opens up to the light, ascending in 3 broad terraces connected by ramps, leading back into the cliff face itself where the most sacred sanctuaries are located. It feels different, more open, more integrated with the divine landscape. It's less of a fortress for the gods and more of a stairway to the heavens. This temple wasn't just a place for her funerary cult after her death. Mortuary temples in the New Kingdom served a wider purpose. They were places where priests performed daily rituals for the deceased pharaoh's spirit, their ka, ensuring they were sustained in the afterlife. But they were also active cult centers dedicated to important gods like Ammonius, Hathor, and Anubis, and crucially, they served as monumental statements about the pharaoh's life, achievements, and legitimacy. Hatshepsut's temple at Deir el-Bahari was a prime example of this latter function. It was a giant, stone biography and political manifesto rolled into one. Every relief, every statue, every inscription in this temple was carefully chosen to tell a story, Hatshepsut's story, as she wanted it remembered. It was designed to solidify her claim to the throne, celebrate her divine connections, showcase the prosperity of her reign, and immortalize her unique achievements. If her decision to focus on peace and building was her philosophy, Deir el-Bahari was its physical embodiment, carved into the very rock of Egypt. It's here that you find the most detailed visual accounts of the key events and justifications of her reign. The divine birth narrative is etched into the walls, proving her heavenly mandate. Reliefs show her coronation, with the gods endorsing her rule. And most famously, the walls depict the grand expedition to the distant land of Punt, a testament to her focus on trade and exploration rather than military conquest. Building this temple was a way of writing her version of history in permanent stone, a powerful act of self-definition and legitimation. A mainstream historical fact about Deir el-Bahari is that its multi-terrace design, built into the natural cliffs, was highly unusual for Egyptian mortuary temples of the New Kingdom, setting it apart from contemporary structures and showcasing innovative architectural approaches. Now, for a quirky tidbit, there are numerous subtle, and some not so subtle, depictions of Senenmut within the temple complex, sometimes even tucked away in obscure spots like behind doors or in hidden niches. In some instances, he is shown kneeling before Hatshepsut or even embracing her. These depictions, along with inscriptions giving him extraordinary titles and privileges, have fueled endless speculation among Egyptologists about the true nature of his relationship with the queen. Was he just a loyal, highly favored OFFI Sile, or was there something more? It's the ancient equivalent of finding hidden selfies of the architect in the cornerstone of a major building project. Historians still argue whether the primary purpose of Hatshepsut's Deir el-Bahari temple was mortuary, focused on her afterlife cult, religious, a major center for the cults of Ammonius, Hathor, etc., or primarily political propaganda, a massive statement designed to legitimize her rule and showcase her achievements. It was likely a combination of all these things, but the emphasis placed on narratives like the divine birth and the Punt expedition strongly suggests a significant propaganda function. Building a temple of this scale and complexity required immense resources, skilled labor, and sophisticated planning. It demonstrated Hatshepsut's ability to command vast projects, mobilize the necessary workforce, and fund ambitious undertakings, all key attributes of a capable pharaoh. The sheer act of constructing Djeser was a powerful assertion of her authority and a tangible representation of the prosperity and stability of her reign. It was a monument to peace, piety, and prosperity, standing in stark contrast to the usual glorification of military victories found on the walls of other pharaohs' temples. She was literally building her legacy, one massive stone block at a time, into the side of a mountain. And the stories carved onto those walls are where we'll delve deeper into the specifics of her unique reign. So, you've arrived at the foot of those dramatic cliffs on the west bank, gazing up at Djeser, Hatshepsut's magnificent temple. You've got the general idea. It's her statement piece, a monument to her unique reign. But to really appreciate it, you need to walk through it, terrace by terrace, and see how the architecture itself tells her story. Forget the typical New Kingdom temple layout with its massive pylons and enclosed courtyards. This place is different. It rises in 3 distinct levels, or terraces, connected by long, gentle ramps that lead you upwards towards the cliff face. It's designed to draw you in and elevate you, physically and perhaps spiritually, as you move through it. The terraces are wide and open, lined with colonnades, rows of pillars, creating shaded walkways that feel both grand and inviting. Imagine standing on the lowest terrace. This was originally a beautifully landscaped garden, filled with exotic trees and plants, many brought back from Hatshepsut's famous expedition to Punt. More on that glorious trip later, I promise. There would have been pools and walkways, a little oasis of green against the arid desert backdrop. It was meant to represent Egypt itself, a fertile land blessed by the gods and ruled by a benevolent pharaoh. From here, a central ramp, flanked by sphinxes and statues of Hatshepsut, leads you up to the second terrace. As you ascend the ramp, you reach the middle terrace. This is perhaps the most famous level, dominated by 2 long colonnades on either side of the upper ramp. The reliefs carved into the walls of these colonnades are where the real storytelling happens. On one side, you have depictions of the divine birth narrative, showing Ammonius visiting Hatshepsut's mother and ordaining her rule. On the other side, the one that really captures the imagination, are the scenes of the expedition to Punt. These aren't battle scenes, they are vibrant, detailed accounts of a peaceful trade mission, showing the ships, the people of Punt, the exotic goods exchanged, and the triumphant return to Egypt. It's like a National Geographic special carved in stone, thousands of years old. Also on this middle terrace are two important chapels carved into the cliff face. To the south, your left as you face the cliff, is the Chapel of Hathor, the goddess of joy, love, and motherhood, often depicted as a cow or a woman with cow ears. Hathor was particularly important on the West Bank, associated with the afterlife and welcoming the deceased. The reliefs here show Hatshepsut herself, sometimes depicted as a cow, being suckled by the goddess, a powerful symbol of divine nourishment and legitimacy. It's a bit surreal, picturing the mighty pharaoh getting milk from a divine cow, but remember, symbolism was everything in ancient Egypt. To the north is the Chapel of Anubis, the jackal-headed god associated with mummification and guiding souls to the afterlife. This chapel was important for the mortuary cult and ensuring Hatshepsut's successful transition to the next world. Both chapels feature beautiful painted reliefs and statues, demonstrating Hatshepsut's piety and her connection to the crucial deities of the West Bank. Ascending the second ramp brings you to the uppermost terrace. This is the most sacred and secluded part of the temple, leading into sanctuaries carved deep into the living rock of the cliff. The main sanctuary here is dedicated to Ammonius, the chief god of Thebes. This was the inner sanctum, the Holy of Holies, hence the temple's name, Jezeru. Here, the statue of Ammonius would have resided, and only the highest priests, and the pharaoh herself would have been allowed to enter to perform the most sacred rituals. Behind the sanctuary of Ammonius is another, smaller sanctuary, believed to be dedicated to Hatshepsut's father, Thutmose. This was another strategic move, linking her cult directly to her respected predecessor, and reinforcing her claim as his rightful heir. There are also chapels dedicated to the royal funerary cult and possibly to Ra, the sun god, reflecting the pharaoh's connection to the divine cycle of life and death. The design of the temple, with its ascending terraces and integration into the cliff, was not just aesthetically pleasing, it was deeply symbolic. It mirrored the structure of the cosmos, rising from the earthly realm, the garden terrace, through the realm of human achievement and divine interaction, the middle terrace with its narratives and chapels, to the sacred realm of the gods, the upper sanctuaries. It was a physical journey towards the divine, with Hatshepsut, as pharaoh, facilitating that connection. A mainstream historical fact about the temple at Deir el-Bahari is that its design directly influenced later mortuary temples, particularly those of the Ramesside period, although none replicated its unique terrace structure built into the cliff face quite as dramatically. It was an architectural innovation that left a lasting mark. Now for a quirky tidbit. While the temple appears symmetrical from the front, the chapels on the middle terrace, Hathor and Anubis, are not identical in size or layout. The Hathor chapel is significantly larger and more elaborate, reflecting the particular importance of this goddess on the West Bank and perhaps Hatshepsut's personal devotion to her. It's like having two wings on a building, but making one noticeably fancier because you like that department better. Historians still argue whether the unique multi-terrace design of Deir el-Bahari was primarily inspired by the nearby 11th dynasty temple of Mentuhotep II, an earlier ruler who also built a terrace structure at the site, or if it represented a completely new and innovative concept developed by Senenmut and Hatshepsut to specifically suit her reign's themes and the dramatic landscape. Was it an homage and evolution, or a radical departure? The debate continues. Building this temple required immense resources, not just for the stone and labor, but for the detailed carvings and vibrant paint that would have covered every surface. It was a colossal undertaking, a testament to the wealth and stability of Hatshepsut's reign, a period defined by these grand projects rather than military campaigns. The temple stands today as her most enduring monument, a stone echo of her ambition, her piety, and her unique vision for Egypt, a vision that found its most vivid expression in the detailed stories carved onto its walls, particularly those depicting a remarkable journey to a faraway land. So, you've walked up the ramps, past the garden terrace, and you're standing on the middle terrace of Hatshepsut's temple at Deir el-Bahari. You've seen the chapels to Hathor and Anubis carved into the rock. But what really grabs your attention are the walls lining the long colonnades on this level. They aren't just decorated, they are covered, top to bottom, with incredibly detailed, vibrant painted reliefs. And on the south side, facing the Hathor Chapel, is a story unlike any other found in such prominence on a pharaoh's temple walls: the legendary expedition to the land of Punt. Imagine this as a graphic novel carved in stone, thousands of years before graphic novels were a thing. It's a continuous narrative, unfolding before your eyes as you walk along the colonnade. It starts with the preparations, shows the journey, the arrival, the interactions, the trading, and the triumphant return. It's not a story of bloodshed and conquest, it's a story of international relations, economic enterprise, and the wonders of a faraway land. The reliefs begin by showing the Egyptian ships, large and sturdy, being made ready for the long voyage. You see the crew, the supplies being loaded, the anticipation of a grand undertaking. These weren't just small riverboats. These were seaworthy vessels, capable of navigating the potentially treacherous waters of the Red Sea and beyond. Seeing them depicted here emphasizes the scale and ambition of the project. Then, the narrative shifts. You see the ships sailing, their sails full, their oars dipping rhythmically into the water. The artists have even included details like fish and other sea creatures in the water below, bringing the scene to life. It's a visual testament to Egyptian seafaring capabilities, proving they weren't just masters of the Nile, but could venture out into the wider world. Next, the scene changes dramatically. The ships have arrived. You see the land of Punt, depicted as a foreign place with unusual round houses built on stilts, accessible by ladders. The landscape is different from Egypt. There are strange trees and plants. And then you see the people of Punt themselves. The artists have taken care to show them with distinct physical features and clothing, clearly differentiating them from Egyptians. They are shown greeting the Egyptians, sometimes with apparent curiosity or deference, sometimes participating in the exchange. The ruler of Punt, Queen Hatshepsut, is depicted as quite portly, and her husband, King Pharaohs, is shown as slender. This detail, while potentially intended to emphasize the exotic nature of the Puntites, also provides a rare glimpse into how Egyptians perceived and represented foreigners. The heart of the narrative is the trading itself. The reliefs show the Egyptians presenting gifts, necklaces, axes, daggers, to the Puntites, establishing good relations before the bartering begins. Then you see the Puntites bringing their goods to the Egyptian encampment. And oh, the goods! This is where the carvings really highlight the treasures Hatshepsut sought. You see piles of aromatic resins, frankincense and myrrh, gathered from the trees. You see logs of ebony wood, elephant tusks, ivory, golden rings and dust, and exotic animals like baboons, monkeys, and panthers. There are even depictions of live frankincense and myrrh trees, carefully dug up and transported in baskets with their roots intact, so they could be replanted in Egypt. This wasn't just about acquiring finished products, it was about bringing back the source of these valuable commodities. One particularly charming scene shows an Egyptian soldier, or official holding a baboon on a leash, while another carries a potted tree. It adds a touch of everyday reality to the grand narrative, reminding you that behind the state-sponsored expedition were individuals doing the work, probably dealing with unruly monkeys and trying not to damage precious plants. The return journey is also depicted, showing the ships heavily laden with the bounty from Punt. The final scenes show the triumphant arrival back in Egypt, the treasures being unloaded, weighed, and presented to Hatshepsut herself. She is shown overseeing the counting of the goods, offering tribute to Ammonius, and celebrating the success of the expedition. The message is clear: this peaceful mission was immensely profitable and brought great wealth and prestige to Egypt and its pharaoh. These reliefs are incredibly valuable to historians. They provide visual information about ancient Egyptian ships, Puntite architecture and appearance, the types of goods traded, and the logistics of such a long-distance expedition. They are a unique window into the economic and foreign policy of Hatshepsut's reign. A mainstream historical fact about the Punt colonnade reliefs is that they are the most comprehensive visual record of a trade expedition from ancient Egypt, detailing not only the goods exchanged but also aspects of the foreign land and its people. Now for a quirky tidbit about the punt reliefs. Among the exotic animals depicted are giraffes, although they are shown being led by Egyptians, suggesting they might have been acquired elsewhere before or after the main punt journey, or perhaps traded indirectly. The depiction of the Puntite Queen Ati is unusually detailed, showing her physical appearance in a way that is rare for depictions of foreign rulers in Egyptian art. It's like the ancient Egyptian version of paparazzi photos, maybe a little unflattering, but definitely memorable. Historians still argue about the exact location of the land of Punt based on these reliefs and other Egyptian texts. Was it on the African coast south of Egypt, perhaps in modern-day Eritrea, Ethiopia, or Somalia? Or was it across the Red Sea, perhaps in the Arabian Peninsula? The debate continues, with the depictions of the landscape, animals, and goods in the Deir el-Bahari reliefs providing key, but not entirely conclusive, clues. These painted walls were more than just historical records. They were powerful propaganda. They showcased Hatshepsut as a pharaoh who brought prosperity and exotic wonders to Egypt through peaceful means, contrasting with the military exploits of other rulers. They highlighted her connection to Ammonius, showing the expedition was undertaken at the god's command and the bounty dedicated to him. They demonstrated her capability to organize and fund such a massive undertaking, a clear sign of a strong and effective ruler. Walking along this colonnade, you can almost smell the incense, hear the squawking of the monkeys, and feel the excitement of the Egyptians returning home with their ships full of treasures. It's a vivid, compelling story, etched in stone for eternity, a central piece of the legacy Hatshepsut was so carefully constructing at Deir el-Bahari. It raises the question, how did they even plan and execute such an ambitious journey in the first place? So you've just walked along that incredible colonnade at Deir el-Bahari, mesmerized by the detailed story of the Punt expedition etched into the stone. You've seen the ships, the strange houses on stilts, the exotic animals, and the piles of incense and gold. It's a stunning visual record, a testament to Hatshepsut's ambition and her focus on trade. But seeing the pictures naturally makes you wonder, how did they actually pull this off? This wasn't just popping down to the local market. This was a major international undertaking, requiring serious planning, resources, and logistical muscle. Getting to Punt and back wasn't like a quick trip up the Nile. It was the ancient equivalent of a mission to a distant, slightly mysterious land. The motivation for such an ambitious journey is explicitly stated in the temple reliefs themselves. Hatshepsut undertook the expedition at the direct command of the god Ammonius. Now, whether Ammonius literally appeared to her in a dream and said, "Hey, go get me some incense," or if this was Hatshepsut cleverly using religious authority to justify a politically and economically beneficial venture, is, as with many things ancient, a matter of perspective and faith. But presenting it as a divine mission was crucial. It elevated the expedition from a simple trading trip to a sacred undertaking, ensuring priestly support and reinforcing Hatshepsut's image as Ammonius' favored pharaoh. The main goal, according to the inscriptions, was to acquire frankincense and myrrh, precious aromatic resins used in vast quantities in temple rituals, particularly the daily service to Ammonius. But they also sought ebony, ivory, gold, animal skins, and exotic animals, luxury goods that enriched the royal treasury and added prestige to Hatshepsut's court. It was a blend of pious duty and shrewd economic policy. Planning this expedition must have been a monumental task. Think about everything involved. First, you need ships. A lot of them. The reliefs show a fleet of 5 large vessels. Building ships capable of sailing the Red Sea was different from building Nile boats. They needed stronger hulls, different rigging, and experienced crews who knew how to navigate open water, deal with currents, and handle potential storms. Egypt wasn't traditionally a major seafaring nation in the same way, say, the Minoans or Phoenicians were. They were masters of riverine transport. Building a fleet for a long sea voyage required significant investment in timber, which Egypt lacked and had to import, often from the Levant, shipyards, and skilled labor. It would have taken months, maybe even years, to construct and outfit these vessels. Then there's the crew. You need sailors, navigators, officers, soldiers for protection, scribes to record everything, and officials to conduct the trade negotiations. The reliefs show a significant number of people on the ships and participating in the landing party. This wasn't a small reconnaissance mission. It was a large-scale state-sponsored venture, involving hundreds of people. Imagine the logistics of feeding and watering everyone for a journey that could last several months, round trip. They would have needed to pack vast quantities of dried food, beer, water stored in jars, and supplies for repairs. It's like planning a modern military deployment, but with less reliable maps and a higher chance of scurvy. The preparation phase would have involved coordinating resources from across Egypt. Stone had to be quarried for ballast or potential repairs. Trade goods for exchange had to be gathered: fine linen, metal tools and weapons, jewelry, and other items the Puntites would value. The military component, though not the focus, was still necessary. The Red Sea route wasn't entirely safe, and while the interactions with Punt are depicted as peaceful, having armed guards provided security and projected Egyptian power. The expedition was likely led by a high-ranking official, someone trusted by Hatshepsut to manage such a complex operation. We don't know his name from the reliefs, but he would have wielded considerable authority. A mainstream historical fact about the preparations for the Punt expedition is that it required the construction of a significant fleet of seafaring ships, a major undertaking for Egypt, which was more accustomed to river travel. The detailed depiction of these ships at Deir el-Bahari provides valuable information about ancient Egyptian shipbuilding technology. Now, for a quirky tidbit about the planning. The reliefs show the frankincense and myrrh trees being transported back to Egypt with their roots carefully wrapped. This indicates a deliberate plan not just to acquire the resin, but to cultivate the trees in Egypt, perhaps in the gardens of temples like Deir el-Bahari itself. It was an early attempt at botanical transplantation on a grand scale, showing a forward-thinking approach to securing resources beyond just immediate acquisition. Imagine the ancient Egyptian equivalent of horticulturalists carefully tending to these foreign saplings, hoping they'd survive the journey and thrive in the Egyptian climate. Historians still argue whether the Punt expedition was a unique event commissioned solely by Hatshepsut, or if it was one of a series of less well-documented trading voyages to the region that occurred periodically throughout Egyptian history. While contact with Punt is mentioned in earlier texts, the scale and detailed documentation of Hatshepsut's expedition at Deir el-Bahari make it stand out as unparalleled. The planning didn't stop with ships and supplies. They also had to consider the route. The most likely path involved traveling overland from the Nile Valley to a port on the Red Sea coast, probably near the modern town of Safaga or Qusir. This journey across the eastern desert required organizing caravans to transport people and supplies to the coast. Once there, the ships would be launched and loaded. The voyage down the Red Sea coast would have been long and challenging, navigating unfamiliar waters. They would have needed knowledge of prevailing winds, currents, and safe harbors along the way. It speaks to a sophisticated level of geographical understanding and seafaring skill, even if it wasn't the primary image Egypt projected of itself. The sheer scale of the preparation underscores the importance Hatshepsut placed on this mission. It wasn't a sideline project. It was a major state initiative, comparable in its required resources and organization to building a large temple or launching a military campaign. By investing in this peaceful endeavor, she was demonstrating a different kind of pharaonic power, the ability to command resources, organize complex logistics, and bring wealth and exotic wonders to Egypt through enterprise rather than force. This meticulous planning laid the groundwork for the success of the voyage itself, a journey that would be immortalized on her temple walls and become a defining feature of her unique reign. They were ready. The ships were built, the supplies packed, the crew assembled. All that was left was to set sail for the legendary land of Punt. So, the meticulous planning is complete. The ships, built with precious imported timber and caulked to be seaworthy, sit ready on the Red Sea coast. The hundreds of crew members, soldiers, scribes, and officials are assembled, supplies are loaded, and the air is thick with anticipation. You've traveled overland from the Nile, perhaps enduring a hot, dusty trek across the eastern desert, finally arriving at a bustling port that looks very different from the familiar riverside harbors. This is where the Nile-centric world meets the wider ocean, the gateway to distant lands like Punt. Imagine standing there, watching these 5 magnificent ships, perhaps named something grand like the appearance of Ammonius, or Hatshepsut is united with the divine, being prepared for departure. They are larger than any vessel you've seen on the Nile, with high prows and sterns often decorated with symbols like the Eye of Horus for protection. The punt reliefs at Deir el-Bahari give us our best visual representation of what these ships looked like: sturdy, with large square sails, and rows of oarsmen along the sides for when the wind died down or for maneuvering. It's a moment of high drama, a state-sponsored fleet setting sail into the unknown. The journey itself would have been arduous and potentially dangerous. Sailing down the Red Sea coast wasn't like cruising the Mediterranean. The waters could be unpredictable, with strong currents, hidden reefs, and sudden storms. The heat would have been intense, the sun beating down on the open decks. Days would blend into weeks, the rhythm of life dictated by the rising and setting sun, the wind in the sails, and the constant dip and pull of the oars. You'd be living cheek by jowl with hundreds of others, relying on stored provisions, hoping they didn't run out and that the water didn't go foul. It wasn't exactly a luxury cruise. Think more like a very long, very hot, very crowded camping trip on a wooden boat, with the added risk of pirates or bad weather. The route likely hugged the coastline, allowing the ships to put into shore periodically to replenish water supplies, if they could find reliable sources, perhaps trade for fresh food with local communities along the way, or shelter from storms. Navigating would have relied on a combination of coastal piloting, recognizing landmarks along the shore, and celestial navigation, using the stars at night. There were no compasses or GPS, obviously, just accumulated knowledge passed down through generations of sailors, combined with courage and a healthy dose of faith in the gods. The reliefs in the temple showed the ships at sea, their sails full, dolphins leaping in the water alongside them. It's a romanticized view, no doubt, but it captures the sense of movement and the vastness of the ocean compared to the contained world of the Nile. You can almost feel the spray on your face, hear the creak of the timbers, and the rhythmic chant of the oarsmen. As they sailed further south, the landscape would have changed, becoming more arid and rugged. The people they might encounter along the coast would be different from the Egyptians, speaking different languages and living in different ways. Every stop would have been an opportunity for trade, diplomacy, or potential conflict, though the primary goal was clearly to reach Punt. The length of the voyage is uncertain, but estimates range from several weeks to a few months each way, depending on the winds, the route taken, and how many stops were made. It was a significant commitment of time and resources, tying up valuable assets and personnel for a considerable period. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. It was a carefully planned investment with high potential rewards. A mainstream historical fact about the voyage to Punt is that the reliefs at Deir el-Bahari provide unique visual evidence of the types of ships used by Egyptians for seafaring voyages on the Red Sea during the New Kingdom period, showing features adapted for open water travel. Now, for a quirky tidbit about the journey. The reliefs depict not only the ships but also scenes of the crew, including what appear to be sailors climbing the rigging or busy with tasks on deck. They even show the anchors being lowered upon arrival. These small details bring the ancient voyage to life, offering a glimpse into the daily realities aboard an Egyptian ship thousands of years ago. Imagine the ancient Egyptian equivalent of a sailor's shanty being sung to keep time for the oarsmen, perhaps with lyrics complaining about the heat or the lack of fresh dates. Historians still argue whether the Red Sea was the only route taken to Punt by Egyptians. Some theories suggest overland routes through Nubia or even journeys starting from the Mediterranean, though the evidence from Hatshepsut's temple strongly emphasizes the Red Sea maritime path for this specific expedition. Finally, after weeks of sailing, navigating, and enduring the rigors of life at sea, the ships would have reached their destination, the land of Punt. The reliefs show the arrival, the anchoring of the ships, and the Egyptians disembarking onto the shore. The landscape is clearly depicted as foreign, with those distinctive stilt houses and unusual trees. The local inhabitants come out to greet them, bringing their goods. The long journey is over. The purpose of the expedition, the trade mission itself, is about to begin. It was a journey that showcased Egypt's reach and Hatshepsut's determination to connect with distant lands, not through force, but through commerce and exploration. They had arrived, ready to acquire the wonders that would soon adorn the temples and palaces of Egypt. So, you've made it. The long, hot, potentially seasickness-inducing journey down the Red Sea is finally over. Your ship drops anchor, the sails are lowered, and the oarsmen rest their weary arms. You disembark onto the shore of the land of Punt, a place that, according to the Deir el-Bahari reliefs, looks distinctly different from home. You see those strange, round houses built on stilts, perhaps to protect against floods or animals, or maybe just because they like the view. The air smells different, maybe the salty tang of the sea mixed with the sweet, heavy scent of unfamiliar trees and flowers. The reliefs vividly depict the arrival. The Puntites, led by their ruler, Queen Adi and her husband King Parahu, come down to the shore to meet the Egyptians. The scene is one of formal diplomatic exchange rather than hostile encounter. The Egyptians set up a camp, pitching tents and preparing for the interactions. Gifts are exchanged first, a crucial step in ancient diplomacy to establish good faith and mutual respect before getting down to business. The Egyptians present items like weapons, tools, and jewelry, things the Puntites might value. This wasn't just a simple swap meet. It was a state-level trade negotiation, albeit one conducted on a sandy beach. The primary object of this entire ambitious undertaking, the reason Hatshepsut commissioned this massive expedition, was to acquire frankincense and myrrh. These weren't just pleasant smells. They were essential commodities in ancient Egypt, particularly for religious rituals. Temples used vast quantities of incense daily to purify the air, please the gods, and accompany prayers and offerings. Burning incense was seen as a way to connect the earthly realm with the divine. Frankincense and myrrh trees didn't grow in Egypt, so securing a reliable supply from places like Punt was strategically vital, especially for the powerful cult of Ammonius in Thebes. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of securing a stable supply of oil or rare earth minerals today, absolutely necessary for the functioning of the state and its most important institutions. The reliefs show the Puntites bringing the goods to the Egyptian camp. You see them carrying baskets overflowing with resin, logs of ebony wood, and elephant tusks. The trade itself appears to have been conducted through barter. The Egyptians offered finished goods, textiles, and perhaps precious metals, though the reliefs emphasize the exchange of Egyptian manufactured items, in exchange for Punt's raw or semi-processed resources. There wasn't a universal currency like coins yet. Value was negotiated based on the perceived worth of the goods being exchanged. It was a complex process of negotiation, likely involving interpreters, weighing goods, and ensuring both sides felt they were getting a fair deal. Imagine haggling over a pile of fragrant resin using axes and fine linen as your currency. It required trust and careful calculation. Beyond the precious resins, the Egyptians were keen to acquire other exotic goods. Ebony, a dark, hard wood, was highly prized for furniture and decorative objects. Ivory from elephant tusks was used for carvings and inlays. Animal skins, gold, Punt seems to have been a source of gold, and live animals were also part of the bounty. The reliefs show baboons, monkeys, and even panthers being led or carried by the Egyptians. These exotic creatures would have been destined for the royal menagerie or perhaps kept in temple precincts, adding to the wonder and prestige of the pharaoh's court. Acquiring live frankincense and myrrh trees, as depicted, was perhaps the most forward-thinking part of the exchange, an attempt to bring the source of the wealth back home. Imagine the care required to keep those trees alive on the long voyage back. A mainstream historical fact about the Punt expedition is that the primary goods sought were frankincense and myrrh, essential for religious ceremonies in Egypt, highlighting the intertwined nature of piety and economic policy in Hatshepsut's reign. Now, for a quirky tidbit about the trading process. The reliefs depict the Puntites using ladders to descend from their stilt houses to the ground for the trade. This visual detail, combined with the unique architecture, further emphasizes the foreignness of Punt from the Egyptian perspective. It's like the ancient Egyptian artists were saying, "Look how different this place is. They live in tree houses and climb down to sell us stuff." Historians still argue about the exact nature of the trade relationship between Egypt and Punt. Was it purely an equal exchange of goods through barter, as the reliefs suggest? Or did elements of tribute or unequal exchange also play a role, reflecting Egypt's status as a major power? The reliefs present an idealized picture of peaceful, mutually beneficial trade, which likely served Hatshepsut's propaganda goals. The successful completion of the trade mission in Punt was a monumental achievement. It demonstrated Hatshepsut's ability to organize complex, long-distance ventures, secure valuable resources for Egypt, and conduct peaceful relations with foreign lands. It reinforced her image as a pharaoh who brought prosperity and divine favor to the land, fulfilling the will of Ammonius by acquiring the incense needed for his cult. The sheer volume and variety of goods brought back would have been impressive, a tangible sign of the expedition's success and the wealth of Hatshepsut's reign. The Punt Colonnade at Deir el-Bahari is a permanent celebration of this achievement, a visual record of a peaceful mission that was just as important, if not more so in Hatshepsut's eyes, than any military victory. With the ships now fully laden with the treasures of Punt, the next step was the long journey home, and the triumphant return that would solidify the expedition's success in the eyes of Egypt. So, you've witnessed the complex negotiations and the careful exchange of goods on the shores of Punt. The ships are now loaded, sitting lower in the water, heavy with the precious cargo, the fragrant resins, the exotic woods, the gleaming gold, the bewildered animals, and perhaps most precious of all, those carefully potted trees. The mission is accomplished. All that remains is the long, potentially perilous journey back to Egypt, and the triumphant arrival that Hatshepsut intends to make sure everyone remembers. Imagine the scene, the Egyptian contingent saying their farewells to the Puntite rulers and their people. Perhaps there were ceremonies, last-minute exchanges, promises of future visits. Then, the crew boards the ships, the anchors are raised, and the fleet turns its prows northward, back towards the Red Sea and eventually, the Nile. The return journey might have been faster, perhaps catching favorable winds that blow northward for part of the year in the Red Sea. Or it might have been just as slow and challenging as the outward voyage, battling currents and relying on the weary arms of the oarsmen. Life aboard would return to its familiar, cramped rhythm, but this time, there's the added responsibility of safeguarding a fortune in valuable goods. You'd be constantly checking the lashings, ensuring the precious trees were watered, and keeping a watchful eye on any monkeys trying to escape their cages. The Punt reliefs at Deir el-Bahari, which have been our visual guide, don't dwell as much on the hardships of the return voyage as they do on the arrival in Punt and the trading itself. This makes sense. The propaganda value was in showcasing the successful acquisition of goods, not the potential dangers faced at sea. So, we jump relatively quickly from the trading scenes to the depiction of the ships sailing back, their hulls visibly lower in the water due to the weight of the cargo. It's a visual cue telling you, look how much stuff they brought back! Finally, after weeks or months at sea, the ships would arrive back at the Red Sea port from which they departed. Imagine the relief of seeing familiar Egyptian faces, the solid ground under your feet after so long on the waves. But the journey wasn't over yet. The cargo had to be unloaded from the ships and then transported overland across the eastern desert back to the Nile Valley, and then likely sailed upriver to Thebes, the capital. This would have required organizing large caravans of donkeys and porters, another significant logistical undertaking. Think of the line of people and animals stretching across the desert, laden with baskets of incense and struggling with confused baboons. It was a major operation, showcasing Hatshepsut's administrative capacity to coordinate resources across different environments. The real spectacle, the moment designed for maximum impact, was the arrival of the expedition and its bounty in Thebes. This wasn't just a quiet delivery of goods, it was a state procession, a carefully orchestrated display of the wealth and wonders Hatshepsut had brought back to Egypt. The reliefs at Deir el-Bahari dedicate significant space to this triumphant return. You see the treasures being carried in procession, soldiers marching alongside officials, priests observing, and presumably, crowds of onlookers marveling at the sight. The goods are meticulously depicted, large piles of fragrant frankincense and myrrh resin, logs of ebony, elephant tusks, gold rings and bags of gold dust, animal skins, and the live animals themselves, baboons, monkeys, perhaps even a panther or two. And prominently displayed are those precious frankincense and myrrh trees, still in their baskets, being carried with immense care. These weren't just raw materials. They were symbols of Egypt's expanded reach and Hatshepsut's ability to acquire the most coveted resources. It was a show and tell on a national scale, proving that her peaceful approach could yield riches comparable to, or even exceeding, those gained through military conquest. The final destination for much of this bounty, according to the reliefs, was the temple of Ammonius at Karnak and also her own mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari. The inscriptions detail the dedication of vast quantities of incense, gold, and other goods to Ammonius, fulfilling the divine command that initiated the expedition. This act of piety was crucial for Hatshepsut's legitimacy. It showed she was using the wealth acquired through her initiatives to honor the chief god and maintain Ma'at. The live trees were reportedly planted in the gardens of her temples, including the lowest terrace at Deir el-Bahari, creating a tangible, living link to the distant land of Punt and providing a local source for the valuable resins. Imagine strolling through the temple gardens and seeing foreign trees growing there, a constant reminder of the pharaoh's successful expedition. It's like having exotic plants in your backyard that actually produce valuable commodities. A mainstream historical fact about the return from Punt is that the Deir el-Bahari reliefs culminate in detailed scenes depicting the presentation of the acquired goods to Hatshepsut and their dedication to the god Ammonius, emphasizing the expedition's success and religious justification. Now, for a quirky tidbit about the reception. The reliefs show Egyptians reacting with awe and excitement as the treasures are paraded through Thebes. Some depictions show officials weighing the gold and counting the goods under Hatshepsut's supervision. There are even scenes of the Puntite goods being integrated into temple rituals and daily life, such as incense being burned or the exotic animals being kept in temple precincts. It's like ancient Egypt's version of a ticker-tape parade showcasing the spoils of a major economic victory. Historians still argue about the overall economic impact of the Punt expedition on Egypt. While the reliefs highlight the vast quantity of goods brought back, it's unclear how frequently such large-scale expeditions occurred during her reign or how significant the Punt trade was compared to other sources of wealth, such as tribute from conquered territories, which Hatshepsut de-emphasized, or internal production. Was it a game-changer for the Egyptian economy, or primarily a prestigious demonstration of power and piety? The debate continues. The successful return from Punt and the public display of its riches were powerful tools in Hatshepsut's legitimation strategy. In a society accustomed to pharaohs demonstrating their might through military victories and conquered tribute, she offered a different narrative: prosperity through peaceful trade, divine favor demonstrated through religious offerings, and national pride derived from ambitious exploration and enterprise. This wasn't just about getting incense. It was about proving that a female pharaoh could be just as effective, just as capable of bringing wealth and stability to Egypt, as any male ruler, perhaps even more so, by choosing a different path. The Punt expedition, immortalized on the walls of her magnificent temple, became a cornerstone of her unique legacy, a lasting testament to a reign focused on creation, connection, and a different kind of power. So, you've seen Hatshepsut immortalize her unique reign, particularly the Punt expedition, on the magnificent walls of her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari. That temple was undoubtedly her masterpiece, her personal statement carved into the cliffs. But Hatshepsut didn't just build for her afterlife or her personal legacy on the West Bank. A truly effective pharaoh had to build for the gods and for the living across the entire country. And Hatshepsut understood this deeply. While Deir el-Bahari was the crown jewel, she embarked on a nationwide building and restoration program that rivaled the most ambitious projects of any pharaoh, cementing her presence and authority from the Delta to Nubia. The most significant focus of this wider building program was the Karnak temple complex in Thebes. Remember Karnak? We mentioned it briefly as the center of the powerful cult of Ammonius. It wasn't just a single temple. It was a sprawling sacred city, constantly being added to and modified by successive pharaohs, each wanting to leave their mark and demonstrate their piety to the chief god. For any pharaoh, contributing to Karnak was essential. It was like building your headquarters on the most prime real estate in the capital and decorating it lavishly. It showed your wealth, your power, and your divine connection. For Hatshepsut, needing to constantly reinforce her legitimacy. Her contributions to Karnak were particularly vital. She had to prove to the powerful priesthood and the people that she was a true pharaoh, capable of honoring Ammonius on the grandest scale. Hatshepsut didn't just add a few minor chapels. She undertook extensive work at Karnak. She restored older sections, particularly those damaged during the Second Intermediate Period centuries before, positioning herself as a restorer of cosmic order and Egypt's past glory. She built new gates, chapels, and additions to the main temple structure. One notable project was the Red Chapel, Chapelle Rouge, a bark shrine made of red quartzite and black diorite, intended to house the sacred boat of Ammonius during processions. Although later dismantled, many of its blocks have been recovered, showing detailed and beautifully colored reliefs depicting her participation in rituals and her relationship with Ammonius. But perhaps her most iconic and visible contributions to Karnak were her obelisks. If Deir el-Bahari was her biography in stone, the Karnak obelisks were her exclamation points, soaring upwards towards the sun god Are, proclaiming her name and her devotion to Ammonius for all eternity. Obelisks were potent symbols of pharaonic power, connecting the king to the divine solar cycle and representing the Benben stone, the primordial mound from which creation emerged. Erecting massive obelisks was a traditional pharaonic act, a demonstration of immense resources, technical skill, and religious piety. Hatshepsut commissioned and erected at least 4, possibly 6, obelisks at Karnak. The most famous pair stood before the 4th pylon. One of these still stands today, a towering granite needle over 97 feet tall and weighing hundreds of tons, crowned with a pyramidion, the small pyramid at the top, that Hatshepsut proudly states was overlaid with electrum, gleaming brilliantly in the Egyptian sun. Imagine the sight. A forest of these polished stone giants, catching the light, their hieroglyphic inscriptions proclaiming the glory of Hatshepsut and Ammonius. The inscriptions on these obelisks are fascinating. They don't just list her titles. They speak directly to the people and the gods, explaining why she erected them. On the base of her standing obelisk at Karnak, she famously says, "My heart is happy when I speak of this monument. It is my wish that it shall remain for eternity. I have done this with a heart full of love for my father Ammonius." She even boasts about the speed of their construction and erection, completing 2 in just 7 months, which, whether entirely true or slightly exaggerated for effect, was a remarkable feat of engineering and organization for the time. It's like saying, "Yeah, I built these massive stone skyscrapers faster than anyone else, just because I could." Transporting these colossal pieces of granite from the quarries at Aswan, hundreds of miles south of Thebes, was an engineering marvel in itself. It required cutting the obelisks from the bedrock, lowering them onto specially built barges, and floating them downstream during the annual Nile flood when the water levels were high enough to handle the weight. The Karnak reliefs, though not on Hatshepsut's own monuments there, but elsewhere, and later texts give us glimpses into the incredible effort involved, thousands of men pulling ropes, levers, and using ramps to maneuver these giants. Erecting them was another challenge, likely involving complex systems of ramps and counterweights. It was a massive logistical puzzle, solved with ancient ingenuity and brute force. Beyond Karnak, Hatshepsut's building activities extended across Egypt. She undertook restoration work at sites like the Temple of Montu at Medamud and the Temple of Mut at Karnak. She commissioned a rock-cut chapel known as the Spios Artemidos, dedicated to the goddess Pakhe, often identified with Batet or Sekhmet, where she explicitly criticized the rule of the Hyksos centuries earlier and positioned herself as a restorer of Egyptian tradition and religious practice. Even minor sites saw her attention, with inscriptions, statues, or small building additions bearing her name. This widespread activity wasn't just about piety. It was about projecting her presence and authority throughout the land, making sure her name was known and her rule acknowledged in every corner of Egypt. These building projects served multiple purposes. Religiously, they honored the gods and ensured the maintenance of Mot. Economically, they stimulated quarrying, transportation, construction, and skilled crafts, providing employment and circulating wealth. Politically, they were powerful statements of her capability, her divine favor, and her right to rule. In a society where monumental architecture was a key indicator of a successful reign, Hatshepsut used building as a primary means of demonstrating her fitness for the throne. While other pharaohs built to celebrate military victories, she built to celebrate piety, prosperity, and her own legitimate place as pharaoh. A mainstream historical fact about Hatshepsut's reign is that she was one of the most prolific builders of the New Kingdom, undertaking major construction and restoration projects at numerous sites throughout Egypt, with her work at Karnak and Deir el-Bahari being the most famous examples. Now, for a quirky tidbit about her obelisks. Some Egyptologists believe that the Electrum Pyramidion on top of her main Karnak obelisk was so bright it could be seen gleaming from miles away, reflecting the sun's rays like a beacon. Hatshepsut herself described it as reaching up to the sky and illuminating the two lands, a powerful image of her connection to the divine and her impact on Egypt. Imagine navigating by the glint off the top of a giant golden stone needle. Historians still argue whether the scale and ambition of Hatshepsut's building program were primarily driven by genuine religious devotion and a desire to restore Egypt's infrastructure, or if they were largely a calculated strategy to employ potential opponents, like the military under Thutmose III, and solidify her legitimacy through tangible, undeniable achievements. Was she a pious builder, or a shrewd political operator using construction as a tool? It's likely a blend of both, as is often the case with complex historical figures. Through these extensive building projects, from the soaring obelisks of Karnak to the integrated terraces of Deir el-Bahari and the restored temples across the land, Hatshepsut physically reshaped Egypt. She left an indelible mark on the landscape, a testament to a reign defined by creation and connection rather than conquest and conflict. These monuments were her legacy, designed to endure for eternity, proclaiming the name of the female pharaoh who chose a different path. But even stone is not always immune to the shifting tides of history and the political agendas of those who come after. So, you've explored Hatshepsut's reign, walking through her magnificent temples, marveling at the punt reliefs, and seeing how she prioritized building and trade over endless military campaigns. You've seen her rise to power, navigate the complexities of being a female pharaoh, and leave an indelible mark on the landscape of Egypt with projects like Karnak and Deir el-Bahari. She built a stable, prosperous Egypt, a different kind of superpower than the one focused solely on conquest. But what happened to this unique pharaoh, and what became of her legacy? The exact circumstances of Hatshepsut's death are unknown. The historical record doesn't provide a clear account of her final years or how her reign ended. It seems she ruled for about 22 years as pharaoh. Thutmose III, her stepson and co-regent, at least nominally for much of her reign, was still alive and growing into a capable military leader under her rule. It's possible she died of natural causes, perhaps in her late 40s or early 50s, a relatively normal lifespan for the time if you avoided major diseases or accidents. Some theories, based on forensic analysis of a mummy tentatively identified as hers, suggest she may have suffered from diabetes and died from complications, perhaps related to an abscessed tooth. Others speculate about more dramatic ends, but there is no solid evidence of foul play. Her reign simply seems to transition into the sole rule of Thutmose III. And it is after her death, during the reign of Thutmose III, that something truly strange and rather unsettling happens. Roughly 20 years after her passing, a systematic campaign was undertaken to erase Hatshepsut from the historical record. Her name was chiseled out of inscriptions on monuments across Egypt. Her images were defaced or plastered over. Statues of her were toppled and smashed, often gathered and buried in pits, as if someone was trying to collect all the evidence of her existence and hide it away. Her cartouches, the oval rings containing her royal names, which were carved onto everything from massive temple walls to small scarab amulets, were meticulously removed. It was an attempt at damnatio memoriae, a Latin term meaning condemnation of memory, although the Egyptian practice predates the Romans. The goal was seemingly to make it appear as if she had never reigned as pharaoh, or at least, that her rule was an illegitimate interregnum that should be forgotten. Imagine the sheer effort involved. Hatshepsut was a prolific builder. Her name and image were everywhere. This wasn't a quick job, It required teams of workmen traveling across Egypt, meticulously chipping away at stone, often high up on walls or on massive obelisks. It was an organized, state-sponsored act of historical revisionism on a grand scale. It's like someone trying to go back and delete every single online mention of a former leader, incredibly difficult and ultimately, as we know now, impossible to do completely. A mainstream historical fact is that approximately 20 years after Hatshepsut's death, a deliberate and widespread effort was made to remove her name and images from monuments throughout Egypt, a practice known as damnatio memoriae. Now, for a quirky tidbit about this erasure. While her name and images were systematically attacked, the reliefs depicting her grand achievements, like the Punt expedition at Deir el-Bahari, were often left relatively intact, even if her cartouches within those scenes were removed. It's as if the accomplishments themselves were too valuable or too impressive to erase entirely, or perhaps the focus was more on removing her as the pharaoh responsible, while still acknowledging the events happened. They wanted to delete her name from the byline, but they left the story mostly readable. Historians still argue whether the damnatio memoriae against Hatshepsut was ordered by Thutmose III out of personal animosity, or revenge for her having usurped his throne, or if it was a decision made later in his reign, perhaps by his son or other officials, for political or ideological reasons. Some theories suggest it wasn't personal vengeance but an attempt to regularize the succession line for future generations, ensuring that only male pharaohs were seen as legitimate rulers and preventing the possibility of another woman claiming the throne. Others propose it happened even later, perhaps during a subsequent dynasty that sought to discredit the 18th dynasty line. Whatever the motivation or the exact timing, the erasure was remarkably effective for centuries. Hatshepsut largely disappeared from official king lists and historical accounts compiled by later Egyptians. Her reign was simply folded into the long reign of Thutmose III, or skipped over entirely. For a long time, historians only knew of her indirectly, through fragmented inscriptions or mentions by later writers who didn't fully understand who she was. She became a ghost in the historical record. But stone is stubborn, and the campaign of erasure, while extensive, was not total. Some remote chapels were missed. Some high-up inscriptions were too difficult to reach. And the sheer volume of her building work meant that traces of her reign remained scattered across Egypt. It was only in the 19th and 20th centuries, as Egyptologists began to systematically study and excavate sites like Deir el-Bahari and Karnak, that the evidence of a powerful female pharaoh started to emerge. As they pieced together the defaced inscriptions and reassembled shattered statues, Hatshepsut's story was slowly, painstakingly rediscovered. It was like finding a lost chapter of history, one that had been deliberately torn out. Her legacy, despite the attempts to bury it, endures. The stable and prosperous Egypt she cultivated provided the foundation for Thutmose III to become one of Egypt's greatest warrior pharaohs, expanding the empire to its greatest extent. The trade networks she fostered continued to benefit Egypt. And her architectural innovations, particularly at Deir el-Bahari, influenced later temple design. She proved that a female ruler could govern effectively, undertake massive state projects, and bring wealth and stability to the land, even if later generations found that fact inconvenient. Today, Hatshepsut is no longer a forgotten figure. She is recognized as one of ancient Egypt's most fascinating and successful pharaohs, a woman who defied tradition and carved her own path to power, leaving behind a legacy of peace, prosperity, and monumental beauty that the sands of time, and the chisels of political rivals, could not entirely erase. Her story reminds us that history is often complex, sometimes deliberately distorted, and that even in the most seemingly rigid societies, remarkable individuals can challenge the norms and leave their mark for eternity, waiting patiently in the stone for their story to be rediscovered. And now, as we drift back from the sun-drenched temples and bustling ports of ancient Egypt, feel the lingering warmth fade. The echoes of chisels on stone, the murmur of crowds watching the Punt treasures arrive, the scent of incense rising from temple altars. Let them soften. Let them become distant whispers on the wind. The pharaoh in the false beard, the queen who became king, her story is etched not just in stone, but in the quiet persistence of time, A reminder that even when names are erased, achievements can still resonate across the millennia. The desert air cools now, the stars begin to appear, vast and timeless, just as they were above Thebes thousands of years ago. Breathe softly, feel the weight of history lift. The journey is complete. The ancient world settles back into silence, leaving you here, comfortable and safe, letting the images fade, letting your thoughts grow calm, drifting, towards sleep.